Hi there, I'm John Hope from Sophos and welcome to this short webinar in conjunction with Hermitage Solutions. Today we're going to look at Sophos MDR and we're going to learn all about the threat landscape from our report, The State of Ransomware 2025. So before we do that, quick introduction to myself. As I said, my name is John Hope. I have the privilege of being Senior Technology Evangelist for Sophos across Northern Europe. I joined Sophos in 2011, joined somewhat by accident. I was running the firewall business in the UK and Ireland for Astaro, which, if you're not familiar with Astaro, was one of two firewall vendors that Sophos have acquired over the years. And I've been here ever since. I've done lots of different jobs, moving from sales to overlay specialist into an engineering role. And now I spend most of my time hanging out with the cool kids in marketing because they produce all of the interesting research and data. And as you'll see in a short while, I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to statistics, and they give me access to all those interesting bits of research. Outside of working for Sophos, I'm a sucker for doing more work. Myself and my wife, we co-own a pet care business. That is our animal ambulance that you can see in the screen image just there, which did get me onto the heights of daytime TV here in the UK when a TV vet joined us for the day to see what we get up to in our animal ambulance. So if you want to know a bit more about how to do CPR on a dog, then you can find me afterwards. I live in Birmingham in the heart of the UK, about as far from the ocean as you can get. So obviously a natural hobby for me is to sail. That's me on the water there in my yellow hulled boat there. That's my Miracle. And I have two boys who often act as crew members, assuming I haven't tipped them out into the lake the week before, especially this time of year when it's very cold. They're not quite so keen on coming back if they've had a dunk in the lake. But that's enough about me. You probably didn't come here to hear about me. You probably came here to learn a bit more about things like Sophos MDR. So we'll have a look at what MDR is first of all. So MDR is Managed Detection and Response, and this is essentially a service provided by cybersecurity vendors like Sophos that allows us to review telemetry coming from customers, and then if we spot something which looks like it could be suspicious or dangerous, that we respond accordingly. Now, before we go too much into what MDR actually delivers, it's really important that we understand why there is a need for MDR. And the essential need for MDR is really the unfortunate reality that going out and buying technology in 2026 and expecting you to be secure and for that technology to keep you protected against every single threat is unrealistic. As you'll find out in a short while, a lot of cybercrime is delivered by humans, and humans are able to problem solve and are very determined in many cases. So if you give a determined cybercriminal long enough, no matter what protection measures you've got in place, they will ultimately be able to get into an estate. And technology can often be thwarted by that human innovation. So that's what's driving the need for MDR. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. So what we'll do is we'll have a look at the landscape, and we're going to do that using two sets of information. The first comes from research conducted by our counter threat unit. So this is a small team within Sophos that does many things, including actually actively infiltrating cybercrime gangs to better understand the tools at their disposal, the tactics that they deploy, and their motivations. And we're also going to learn from the State of Ransomware report, which gives this presentation part of its title. If you're not familiar with the State of Ransomware report, this is a survey that we conduct at Sophos every year. It's now in its 6th iteration. And what we do is we interview IT managers, budget holders, decision makers, people potentially very much like yourselves that have been selected for us at random, so that we can get a really good idea about how the cybercrime landscape actually looks. When you see some of the statistics from these recipients of the survey later on, do please bear in mind that they were selected at random, and statistically speaking, probably most of them aren't Sophos customers, because you'll see that some of the stats are actually quite shocking. So the people that responded to the survey come from 17 different countries, from organizations of all sizes from 100 to 5,000 seats, and various different sizes of annual revenue and turnover, from various different verticals as well. So almost every sector and every organization size is represented in some way through this this survey. So the first thing that people want to know from this survey is really why organizations fall victim to cybercrime. And as you might expect, there is no one single answer, but some of the characteristics that organizations often share is that they have vulnerabilities that are available for the cyber criminals to exploit. This is technical vulnerabilities. So in other words, situations where maybe software hasn't been updated, it hasn't been patched, you're running legacy systems, all of which are open invitations for the cyber criminals to infiltrate your estate. And this, on the face of it, looks like a technology problem with a technology solution. And to an extent, that is absolutely correct. But the reality is that in 2026, most people know that they should be patching and updating their software. But it's actually more of a human problem because there aren't enough time available for the admins to patch successfully. And in some cases, they lack the expertise. So this is particularly true where organizations have a lot of different cybersecurity dashboards and other product dashboards that simply take too much time to consume and manage successfully. And patching is one of those things that just gets pushed down the priority order time and time again, leaving an organization exposed. So yes, it is a technology problem, but I would posit it's one of the first of quite a large number of human factors. When we look again to the left-hand side a little bit more, we do also see quite a large number of human factors. Increasingly, as generally speaking, organizations are better protected by cybersecurity solutions, we are increasingly seeing the cyber criminals target users as part of the attack chain, because unlike systems that can be patched and updated, unfortunately, you cannot simply update your users with more security information. And because we are all emotional beings at heart, the cyber criminals can pull on those attributes that we have and either apply the right incentive or the right amount of pressure to get users to do actions that they probably otherwise wouldn't do. And they are getting more sophisticated at doing this, particularly with the advent of AI. So I've made it just a couple of minutes in before we've talked about AI. But one of the places the cyber criminals use AI very extensively is to replicate well-known brands and also to get over the language barrier, because let's be honest and say that in most cases, the cyber criminals are not native English speakers or not native speakers of the languages of the victims that they're trying to infiltrate. And AI gets around that problem because you can bridge the language barrier and become fluent in any language that you want, but also more so, you can actually replicate things like brand imagery, brand tone of voice to make your phishing scams look more and more convincing. This often leads to compromised credentials, so users giving away their login details. And from a cyber criminal's perspective, it's a lot easier to log in than it is to break in. And it also leads to this kind of a range of more sophisticated phishing attacks and malicious emails, which are all really parts of the same problem. So you'll see there's a lot of human factors at play there. From an organizational stance, victim organizations cite a number of reasons why they are victims of cybercrime, and the astute amongst you will realize very quickly that these numbers do add up to more than 100%, because there's never one single reason why an organization falls victim. If we look at on the left hand side their protection challenges, again in 2026 most organizations have invested in cybersecurity, but if they buy the wrong kind of solutions, then maybe they will be still vulnerable to certain types of attacks. So in your own time after this session, for example, go and look up remote ransomware, because this is an attack vector which almost every cybersecurity solution fails to protect against. And the cyber criminals know this, which is why they're seeing such high levels of success. And even though you've gone out and bought a cybersecurity solution, if you've not bought the right one, then maybe that is an attack vector that you are still vulnerable to. In addition, then you've also got challenges around protection if the solution is not configured properly. If you buy stuff off the shelf and don't set it up properly, then it may not be able to do its job effectively. If we look at security gaps on the right-hand side, sometimes organizations have an appetite for risk, which is another way of saying that they choose not to invest in certain areas, and that can leave them exposed. Or alternatively, in many cases, they simply overlook certain aspects. They fail to protect certain things until it's too late when the cyber criminals exploit that weakness, whatever it might be. And then in the center there, we're right back to human challenges. So the fact is that there's not enough hours in the day to do all the IT tasks that are required, never mind the cybersecurity side of things. Threat hunting in 2026 is very difficult, so a lot of people don't have the skills, and not only is there not enough time, but also you have to be able to do threat hunting really around the clock. The cyber criminals never rest. It is a 24/7 battle, and if your help desk and support desk is not actively looking for threats 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then again you may potentially find yourself vulnerable. So if you do become the victim of a ransomware attack, what happens to the data? Well, in most cases, the cybercriminal's goal is to encrypt data, hold you to ransom so that you pay the ransom demands and you hope that you get your data back. Um, and that you can see represented by both the green and the purple aspects of this graph. So the purple is where data has been successfully encrypted. And you'll see that even in 2025, despite the fact that ransomware is not something that's new, still we see in 50% of occasions, the cyber criminals were able to successfully encrypt data. Now, that means that a large number of security measures have failed to get to that point, and it is an unfortunate indication that not all cybersecurity solutions are able to deal with the modern threat landscape. There is also a small outlying set of attacks, which is represented in blue. These are attacks that involve ransomware, but the data itself is not actually being encrypted. So this may be simply stealing the data and then threatening to publicize it anyway, which doesn't involve encryption of data, but is still potentially devastating to an organization. Very difficult to detect, incidentally, because obviously there are a number of precursory moves that happen before data can be encrypted. Not really the case with those kind of extortion attacks. Very difficult to spot data leaving the organization because it will just join in with all of the regular flows, and it can be very difficult to spot. So what happens if you do have your data encrypted and you're presented with ransom demands on your screen? Well, there's a couple of trends here that I want to call out, which are potentially quite worrying. The first of which is the top line there, the sort of teal coloured line. The use of backups to successfully restore from a ransomware attack is actually decreasing, and that may well be surprising because in 2026, you would expect most organizations know that they should be backing up, and indeed, many organizations do invest in backup technologies. However, the cyber criminals know that the likelihood of getting a ransom payment from an organization that has a backup policy in place and is successfully backing up is unlikely. Why would you pay the cyber criminals when you can simply restore your backups? So in many cases, the cyber criminals are actively targeting backups and attacking those backups in very insidious ways to mean that the organization cannot use that backup to recover when they most need it. So for example, locking organizations out of their own backups by changing the password is now quite commonplace. Conversely, the line in blue there is the propensity of organizations to pay the ransom demand in the hope that they get their data back. And you'll see that, generally speaking, over time, the likelihood of a victim organization paying the ransom is increasing. And this probably worries me more than any other statistic in this survey, because if we continue to pay the cyber criminals off, we are in effect perpetuating the problem. The reality is, of course, that many people will be encouraged into this industry while there is money to be made. And I did very deliberately refer to it as an industry. As long as organizations are paying that, and as long as there's money to be made there will always be cybercrime. Conversely, if we all stopped paying the ransom demands tomorrow, then there would be no cybercrime by the end of the week, at least not of this nature. However, it's very easy for me to say that. It's not my factory that can't produce any items because the machines are silent, or it's not my hospital where doctors can't access patient records. So it's not always that clear-cut decision, but there is a distinct moral and ethical argument which suggests that it is not a good idea to pay the cyber criminals. From a practical stance as well, it's not the best return on investment you'll ever make. You will typically get about 50% of your data back when you pay the cyber criminals off. Most cyber criminal gangs do genuinely want to give you your data back. However, they invest far less effort into making sure the recovery tools work than they do in working out how to get into your organization in the first place. So it's not necessarily a great return on investment, and it's not the silver bullet which gets you back up and running very, very quickly. So do always bear that in mind when making decisions about paying the cyber criminals. The cost of ransomware. Well, as you would expect, being hit by ransomware is expensive. This chart shows us two things. One is that as organizations get bigger, the cost of recovery actually starts to plateau. What that also means is if you turn it on its head, organizations that are smaller in size are hit disproportionately hard by ransomware attacks. This is a double whammy effect because, of course, organizations that are smaller in size have less budget available, less skill set available. They don't necessarily have the best people, the best tools, the best resources to fight cybercrime. And yet when they do become a victim, they are getting hit disproportionately hard. And indeed, in many cases, it does put victim organizations out of business. So those are a little bit of information and insights into the victim side of things, but who are behind these attacks? This is what the media would have you believe a cyber criminal looks like. They are almost universally portrayed as teenagers wearing hoodies, hanging out in mom and pop's basement. It's generally dimly lit for reasons that I'm still not certain about. But the reality of a cyber criminal looks a lot less like this and probably much more like this. This is not just a random image that I selected. What you're looking at here is potentially a cyber criminal on their way to work. The building in the background is in the area known as Gorod Stolis, which is part of Moscow. It's a little bit akin to Canary Wharf, if you're familiar with that part of London, where many financial institutions and major organizations have their headquarters. It's a very expensive piece of real estate. And we know of at least two ransomware gangs over the years that have been headquartered in this very building. The first of which was Ryuk, that became Conti. The reason for knowing that they are headquartered in here will become apparent in just a moment. Also, more recently, a ransomware gang was actually arrested by the Russian authorities in this very building. And yes, you did hear that right. Cybercriminals were arrested by the Russian authorities, but maybe not for the reasons that you might expect. This particular cybercrime gang were very enterprising, and they managed to amass quite a substantial amount of Bitcoin, and they wanted to cash that out into fiat currency, so tangible physical cash. They decided the best way to do that, and the best way to cash out, would be to acquire Western goods using Bitcoin and similar cryptocurrencies, and then sell it through this building into fiat currency. However, they failed to pay the appropriate import and export duties on those goods items, which is why they felt the wrath of the Russian authorities. So a bunch of cyber criminals not being arrested for cybercrime, but absolutely being arrested because of tax evasion. If it's not already clear, then it is absolutely people's day job. So we mapped the initial attack stages of ransomware against the UK clock, so adjusting for Moscow time. And what you see here is cyber criminals logging in at about 9 o'clock, being quite productive during the morning, taking a break for lunch, coming back energized at 1 o'clock and hitting peak productivity before eventually clocking off at about 5 o'clock. Now, as a fun exercise, I mapped this against our sales development team's own productivity stats, and actually it was almost an exact match. So it goes to show that it is absolutely somebody's job around the clock. This graph here actually shows you the number of cybercrime gangs. So this shows you the spread of various different gangs since 2021. This is basically all ransomware, and you'll see that actually when you look on the right hand side, there's a very limited number of gangs overall, and there's an even smaller number of gangs active at any one time. So it's quite a small and quite elite community. And we know a lot about this community because, in particular, one cybercrime gang, which was Conti, which fell apart rather spectacularly in the early stages of 2022. So Conti, derived from Ryuk, as we saw, headquartered in that building in Moscow, decided that they would announce very publicly that they would support Russia's activities in the Ukraine using cyber means and respond to Western aggressors. Now, the interesting thing about Conti was, at the time, a large number of their affiliates, so their gang members, were actually Ukrainian citizens. And this message of supporting Russia's activities didn't go down particularly well with the Ukrainian contingent. So Conti had a very public disagreement, and a lot of information was spilled out over the internet as a result of these disagreements. Everything from personal names and addresses to alleged links to the FSB, through to what, on the face of it, is much more mundane communications. But we found it fascinating. So we learned a huge amount about the structure of Conti. And what we know now is it's much less teenager in a basement, much more line manager, HR department, monthly target, monthly salary, career progression, marketing, basically everything you find in a legitimate business, except, of course, the way they're actually going about making their money. So it gives us a real insight into the structure of a gang, and you can actually see where Conti disintegrated. So the mauve colour there is really where Conti tailed off and disappeared. But as you can see, other gangs have taken over. What we're finding is this constant game of whack-a-mole of gangs. So this is gives you an indication about how cybercrime gangs operate with impunity. This is videos of members of E-Corp. They all have this kind of interesting urban camouflage color scheme on their cars. The leader, Maxim Yakubits, has a car, Lamborghini, I think, that actually has a number plate on it which translates to thief. There was a pet tiger in the passenger seat there, and we've also done some donuts around a police car on the streets of Moscow. So these people are functionally untouchable, and as we take one gang down, another one re-establishes. So this is a constant game of gang whack-a-mole, where gangs either fall apart of their own volition or very occasionally taken down by law enforcement, but another one just comes along to fill the void. Now, you might be thinking at this point, well, why is this important and what on earth has all of this got to do with MDR? But hopefully what I've illustrated is not only do the cybercrime gangs have this huge wealth of financial resources, but also there's no shortage of talent. There's huge quantities of human resources available inside cybercrime gangs. And what it means is the vast majority of attacks that are targeted against organizations are actually with a human at the other end of the attack. So in the days of blocking viruses and malware, it was a relatively simple thing where you were just simply blocking different iterations of code being highly predictable and behaving in the same way time and time again. However, humans are, as I said at the start, blessed with the ability to problem solve, to share intel, share tactics, learn from each other, innovate, and they're notoriously unpredictable. So expecting technology to go out there and protect you in every single instance is simply unrealistic. Humans will always find a way to outsmart technology. So technology on its own simply is not enough to protect an organization, particularly when you look at some of the ways that cyber criminals carry out their nefarious deeds. So we talked about credential abuse, the theft of login details or the guessing of passwords so that you can log in. Very difficult for a system to tell you whether that is legitimate use of that identity or if it's identity being misused against the organization. We also see multi-stage attacks, so remote ransomware, which again I referenced at the start, is a really simple illustration, and there are many more variations of multi-stage attacks, including supply chain attacks, where the attack is distributed across multiple different nodes. It's very difficult to see this kind of big picture. We also have living off the land, which is a tactic very often exploited by the cyber criminals. This is using legitimate IT tools and software like remote desktop tools against an organization. Again, these are things that are used day in and day out by victim organizations. But now we live in the knowledge that those tools could be turned against us and used by the cyber criminals at any moment. And then finally, exploiting weaknesses, technology weaknesses like not patching and not updating, operational weaknesses like knowing that an organization doesn't have a support desk and IT desk running after hours, so evenings, weekends, public holidays are all great times for the cyber criminals to strike. So this is the kind of operation that cybercrime is in 2026. So how do we combat this? Well, there are almost always warning signs, and if we look for those warning signs, we might be able to detect and protect an organization. Unfortunately, the reality is that even though those warning signs are there, many organizations fail to spot them. And this is something which is increasingly challenging, but they are there. We do not see ransomware going from naught to a full-blown attack really quickly. We see typically 5 days worth of cybercriminal logging in, cybercriminal escalating privileges, cybercriminal exfiltrating data, cybercriminal deploying ransomware before eventually the ransomware attack itself actually takes place. And if only we could spot one of these warning signs, then we might be able to keep ourselves safe. But it's really hard. If you think about a typical office, every laptop, every desktop, every switch, every access point, every firewall, every router, pretty much every piece of software, they're all running security solutions or generating data and creating vast amounts of log file data. Now, there might just be one telltale sign somewhere in one of those logs that tell you you're about to have a really bad day, but it can be incredibly difficult to spot. So what the industry has traditionally suggested is going out and buying tools like EDR, like XDR, but we already know that technology on its own isn't enough. And unfortunately, going out and buying tools and expecting them to keep you secure is not realistic either. Those tools require skills and knowledge and understanding. Threat hunting is hard. Like going out and buying the tools and expecting to be able to use them is a little bit like me going out and buying a set of boxing gloves and expecting to overnight become a fighter. You know, the tools are one thing, but the ability to use those tools is something completely different. In simple terms, we believe that cybersecurity has become too difficult for most organizations to do on their own. If you look at headlines and you see car manufacturers, banks, building societies, airlines, all becoming victims of cybercrime, then how on earth could the Acme Sprocket company with just 25 employees and one full-time IT member of staff ever hope to keep themselves secure? It's just unrealistic. This is where MDR really comes into play. We believe that democratizing the SOC and giving organizations of all sizes access to a team of experts 24 hours a day, 7 days a week is really the future of cybersecurity. So what does the MDR team do? Well, they take telemetry from a wide range of various different sources, including, of course, our own products, but also including a wide variety of other cybersecurity and allied vendors as well, with a view to spotting those telltale signs. A large amount of artificial intelligence and algorithm work goes into getting the interesting things in front of a human analyst as fast as possible. In fact, it typically takes less than 1 minute to go from an interesting event through to a case being generated. A human analyst will typically spend 25 minutes investigating, is this problem real? How big is the problem? What do we do about it? And then there is a fork in the road. Some organizations, for whatever reason, want to be woken at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and that's entirely their prerogative. If they want a phone call, we can do that. Alternatively, many organizations don't have the ability to respond 24 hours a day, in which case we can actually fix the problem on the customer's behalf. And if we do that remediation, so killing malicious processes, shutting down accounts, it typically takes a further 12 minutes, which is a mean time to respond of about 38 minutes in total, which is really why you buy MDR. The speed of shutting down that incident. But that number of 38 minutes is potentially slightly abstract. It is very difficult to get information from MDR vendors about how long they typically take to respond. The closest I could find is a Gartner survey across the center there, looking at the state of internal security teams. Now, again, bearing in mind, if you've got an internal security team, you are probably a bank, a major hotel group, something of that ilk. You'll see that the median time to respond is 16 hours. Now, 16 hours is an eternity in which nothing is going to happen in the world of cyber. Cybercriminals will leave back doors, they will steal data, they'll encrypt data, nothing positive will happen in that time. So shutting down the incident within 38 minutes is really the core value of MDR. But there is more to it. So of course, shutting down the incident is a great security outcome. But by having these extra integrations that we have means that we can get a huge value from various different places and investigate incidents and attacks that potentially would never have crossed the Sophos ecosystem. In particular, things like Microsoft, so the creation of suspicious redirect rules for emails, for example, or alternatively looking at backup and recovery. Remember, I said that the cybercriminals will target backups as part of the attack chain. Well, if we see those things very early on, then it's a really good early warning indicator that we have a problem on our hands. And then a final thought is that our MDR service is a global operation. So at time of recording, we have in excess of 35,500 organizations worldwide consuming our cybersecurity service. And what that means is we carry out a huge number of threat investigations. And every time we conduct one of those investigations, we want to take that information and telemetry and push as much down as we can into the technology layer, because we don't want to waste an analyst's time investigating the same incident time and time again. It is not productive. It is not the best use of an analyst's time. So, for example, if we investigate a phishing attack right now in Peru, around about 45 minutes later, customers across Europe are actually being protected against that same threat. The source email address is the URLs it's trying to get you to click on, the body and content of the email itself, all pushed down to technology and blocked by our email solution next time around, so that we don't waste analysts' time and that we deliver better cybersecurity outcomes to all of our customers. It's a bit like joining this worldwide cybersecurity club in which everybody benefits. So that is a quick tour of the threat landscape and why MDR is so important and so relevant. Just by way of summary, cybercrime is changing and evolving enormously. It is no longer a case of dealing with attachments and viruses. It is now dealing and fighting with human operatives. You need to train your humans because they are part of the attack chain, and you need to keep them aware and alert for cybersecurity attacks. But you must also assume that at some point they will fall for it and they will potentially invite some kind of malicious activity into the estate. And you need to look for those signs. If you are able to commit to running your own support desk, then by all means go out there and buy security tools like EDR and XDR. But if you cannot commit to threat hunting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, then this is where the MDR service really comes into play to make sure that you're kept as secure as you can be in the modern threat landscape in 2026. So with all of that said, I hope you enjoyed the session. If you do have any questions, then please reach out to your account manager at Hermitage, and I'm sure they'll be delighted to give you more information. And take care, and thank you for watching.
So thank you for John for his pre-recorded video. Very pity that he couldn't participate live, but we're gonna have a live discussion still. So you see Mikolas, my colleague, joined on this session. So we're gonna address a few of your questions right now. So first of all, yeah, Mikolas, the question is, what does onboarding look like when we speak about the MDR service? What is the, and also follow-up question, what is the minimal size of organization and how quickly can Sophos MDR be deployed within the organization?
Hi, everybody. So it's, frankly speaking, it's quite easy. So let's name few points that are required. So you need to have a Sophos Central account for everything to work. You need to have a license activated for MDR. And then you need to define the authorized contacts from the organization or the partner who is helping the customer. And the last few things is just defining a response method and deploying endpoints. Endpoints protect computers and servers. All the base policies that are coming with the Sophos endpoint are secure by default. And as long as you deploy endpoints, your infrastructure is protected. Now, talking about the minimum size of the company, there is no minimum. You can license 5 or 10 computers. It also can be thousands of computers. And as soon as you install endpoints, MDR takes care of the detection and response.
Okay. Then yes, also very maybe actual for our Baltic region. So it's good that you are answering, not John actually. So if using MDR, a security incident is detected, so who should report it to National Cybersecurity Center? No, I mean in Lithuania it's National Cybersecurity, in Latvia, Estonia there will be other authority, but they would like to get those information about incidents. So how it works in case MDR service?
Okay, as I told before, when you have an account, there is the authorized contacts listed in the account. It means when there's an incident, Sophos will contact either before their reaction, depending on the setting, or after they react, they will say what they did and what was wrong. So those contacts will receive all the communication. Most probably, those will be customer or partner contacts. Now, with this information, is up to our customer and partner to decide who is obliged to report it to National Security Center. And in case of MDR complete fire, the root cause analysis and Sophos incident response retainer can participate in this communication with the National Security Center.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Of course, in more detail, we can reply personally, so you can come back to us with those questions. And yeah, one more before I let you go. So when Sophos detects a threat, what actions can MDR take automatically?
Okay, so first let's talk about the whole protection application. So MDR is based on Sophos endpoint. And all the automation that will detect and contain incidents, it will happen automatically. So where the MDR shines, and that you can sort of outsource all this work to Sophos MDR team, so you do not need to build your SOC yourself. And it will work 24/7, it will be proactive, and it will have rapid hands-on when needed.